back to my channel. This video is another episode from the How Real is Reality series, and as you can see by the title, today we're going to be talking about parallel universes, parallel realities, and the Mandela effect. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. What are parallel universes? How are they created? How we can consciously hop between one universe to the next parallel universe. And I know this information is very complex, but I'm gonna be trying to explain it in a very simplified and easy to understand way, because it is so important for you to realize this, to become aware of this. I personally think that this information is so important that it actually has the potential to change your life. This information has the potential to change your perspective on life and the way you understand the situations happening around you. So without further ado, let's pop right into the video. Okay, so I'm gonna start from the beginning, and I'm gonna tell you what got me into really researching deeply this information, because this is something I was kinda aware of from a while ago, but I was not fully ready to understand what this actually means and how does it actually happen. But what caught my attention a few days ago is that I was looking online and I found a picture about King Tutankhamun's sarcophagus. And I'm gonna show you a picture with it. And before I tell you what is wrong with it, I'm gonna ask you to take a look at it first and think about what you think is wrong in the picture. So as you can see, on its forehead there's a symbol of a snake, and besides it there's the symbol of a bird. You might be wondering, what does this have to do with anything? Well, I'm gonna tell you in just a minute. I personally am somebody who was really passionate about ancient Egypt starting from an early age. I remember I was really fascinated by their deities and the pyramids and their culture and all that stuff. And I even remember there were some cartoons about ancient Egypt that I really used to love. So I am somebody who has seen the picture of this sarcophagus of the King Tut's mask enough times to be 100% sure of the image that I remember it to be. And in my memory, this mask had a single symbol on its forehead. It had a snake. It did not have a snake and a bird. It originally had just a snake. And now you can imagine I was really curious about what's going on, and I initially thought that somebody has photoshopped the picture and added the second element, the bird. But to my surprise, I found that all the pictures you can find on the web, all the videos in which this sarcophagus shows up, and all the articles that talk about it depict it as always having a snake and a bird. I could not believe what I was seeing. I found an article along with some pictures from the original discovery of the sarcophagus and King Tut's belongings. And the first pictures, you can clearly see that the sarcophagus had already both symbols. I also found a documentary from 1978 in which you can also see the two symbols And even in the videos that show up on National Geographic, you can also see that King Tut's sarcophagus had always seemed to have two symbols, a snake and a bird. It seems like the version that I so clearly remember, with it having only a single symbol, a snake in the center of the forehead, has never actually existed. And I'm gonna insert a picture of it so you can see what I mean. My amazement about this thing made me look deeper into it. How is something like this possible? I clearly remember and trust my memory. So I eventually discovered that I am not the only one who remembers it as being a single symbol of a snake. I found out that multiple people share the same memory as I do, and they were explaining the same shock that I was experiencing. I eventually found out that this phenomenon was more common than I thought, and it actually had a name, the Mandela effect, which seems to have started in 2013 with the official death of Nelson Mandela. Why do I say official death? Because when the official announcement that he had died was made, there was a really large number of people who remembered very clearly that he had already died in the 1980s in prison. And we are not just talking about a small number of people, but we are talking about thousands and thousands of people, of strangers who share the exact same memory. Very, very detailed. That, however, seems to have never actually happened in our current reality. And due to the large number of people who reported the same version of events, it became clear that it could not be only memory problems. And that's where the phenomenon kind of got its name. And there are actually many more examples of this phenomenon, and I'm gonna give you a very known one, and that is the Monopoly Man. We have all played Monopoly in our lives at least once, right? So before I actually show you any picture, I want to ask you, how do you remember the Monopoly Man? What does he have on his face? You might probably say that it had a monocle on one of his eyes. But the truth is that in our current reality, the Monopoly Man has never actually worn a monocle. Amazing, right? Our reality is full of unexplained events, memory that come from no place, and pieces of reality that do not correspond to the facts. This is because we actually live in parallel universes that constantly overlap each other, and we are naturally jumping from one reality to another. We are just not consciously aware of it. What other explanation can you have for such a large number of people constantly remembering things that have never actually happened? Are these random thoughts and experiences? We usually dismiss this experience because it's just too weird, and we think that, oh, you know, she doesn't remember well, or he doesn't remember well. But the truth is, he does remember perfectly what he knows, because his memories do not actually come from the same place that yours come. They have all their own parallel universe. But how does this all actually work? Well, let's start from the beginning. Well, we start from the idea that everything is actually energy. And it is in fact proven that 99 99.99% of everything that exists, seen or unseen, is actually energy in constant movement. If you were to actually take all the physical, so-called physical matter and reduce it to a single piece, you would get a pea-sized amount of matter. So anything physical does not actually exist, but it is our observation that contributes to the creation of reality. And the fact that thoughts create matter is not just the same, but it's quantum physics. Scientists have shown that this all-encompassing field of energy has actually two ways of manifesting itself. It can either stay in wave form, which is unphysical energy, or it can manifest itself as a particle, which is what we would consider physical matter. And scientists have actually proven this by the double slit experiment, or the observer effect, in which there is a source of light that projects electrons through a screen with two slots, and those electrons are finally projected into a final wall. When the light travels from the light source, it travels in waveform. It goes through the two slots and it finally reaches the wall. And because of the unusual pattern created by the interference of the waves, the scientists became confused and wanted to place a camera that could observe the behavior of the light. And they observed that as the light was being observed, it changed its form from a wave into a particle. And you can research more on this if you want to visualize the experiment more clearly. But this proves the exact thing that I was just saying. Everything in the world exists in energy form. And when we are not observing it, it all exists in waveform. And it is only when you choose to observe, to pay attention to something, that it manifests itself into a particle that makes itself physical. In other words, the world that we consider real exists only depending on the way we look at it. And it is our simple observation, the one that actually creates reality. And I'm gonna give you an example of this so you can see the picture more clearly. So I have this egg. It's a regular plastic egg, right? And because I'm holding it in front of the camera and I am looking at it and you are looking at it, it manifests itself into particles and I can feel it's physical. But when we are not paying attention to this egg, it exists in wave form because its essence is actually energy. This is actually not real. So if, let's say, I place this egg on the table besides me and I'm not observing it anymore, let's say I close my eyes and you're not seeing it either, and right now this egg exists in waveform, in energy. It is my simple observation of it that makes it to exist as a real solid object. Well, we are not paying attention to this egg because it exists already in energy form as a wave. It exists in an infinite number of parallel realities. So its energy, it's spread all throughout the universe. But it is only when I look at it that all this wave manifests itself into my reality because I expect it to be there and because I believe it's actually going to be there. Another concept that I want to mention to you is quantum entanglement, which proves that everything is connected regardless of the illusory limitations of space and time. And space and time are other illusory concepts. They do not actually exist, at least not how we understand them to exist from our level of consciousness. This quantum entanglement experiment also proves that it is perfectly possible for us to exist in multiple places at once. And I'm going to say this again. It is perfectly possible for us to be in multiple places at once, at least from an energy point of view. And we have already mentioned that everything that exists is energy. And shortly, the way the experiment works is they had two identical protons that were sent 20 kilometers apart, one from the other. So we have two identical protons 20 kilometers apart, and when they took a certain action on this proton over here, the other proton 20 kilometers apart had the exact same simultaneous reactions without actually being touched. And the way you can understand this is by imagining the universe to be a huge piece of canvas in which each thread is alive and it's constantly communicating with all the other threads that form the canvas. You see, each thread, it's so important, and its lack would then affect all the other threads in the canvas. Imagine when, for example, you have a t-shirt and you have a single thread coming out and it's hanging in there, and then you choose to rip it off and to get it cleaned. What this eventually does is it starts affecting and ripping all of the other threads in your t-shirt. And you have to understand in this canvas example that space and time do not actually exist. So even though we imagine them as being single individual threads, they are still different experiences of the whole canvas. And this is the exact same thing that happens with our lives, human or not. Every experience that we have individually works as a single thread in the canvas of the universe. So in other words, the concept of I and you do not actually exist, because in the same way, we are all different experiences of the whole. We are all different experiences of the universe. So how do these parallel universes actually come into being? And the truth is, there is an infinite number of universes and realities parallel to ours. These universes are all interconnected with each other, like the example I gave you earlier with the canvas. And they all exist simultaneously. And at the same time, our universe is constantly intersecting with other parallel universes. And we, as individuals, create other multiple parallel universes all the time. But because of the difference in vibration that every single universe that is created has, and because of our level of awareness, of consciousness, the vast majority of realities are invisible to our physical senses, and we are simply not aware of them. And although we are constantly jumping from a parallel universe to another parallel universe, we are usually not aware of this transition. In any case, the differences between one universe to another are so minor that most people don't even realize the transition, especially because the differences are so small. And they don't consider these differences important enough to mention them. They either think they just imagine them, or because the experience is that crazy, they think they would not be believed anyways. So it doesn't take long for people to actually forget that they've been in a parallel universe. So think about it this way. Every single thought that crosses through your head exists as one of the infinite possibilities in the quantum field, and it manifests itself in a parallel universe. And every time you believe something, for example, you literally shift timelines to a parallel universe in which your life is affected in a way that corresponds to your thought. And every time your belief grows stronger, you become even more deeply rooted in that particular reality. But how does this actually happen? I'm gonna give you a very simple to understand and practical example. So imagine you are thirsty and you have water, you have tea, you have juice, and you have lemonade at hand to drink. All those four options exist as a possibility in the infinite energy around us. So you have four different results that will shift you into four different timelines. If let's say that you choose to drink water, you will then create a parallel universe in which an alternate version of yourself will choose to drink juice. You will then create another parallel reality with yet another alternate of yourself that will choose the tea, and yet another one that will choose the lemonade. So because everything already exists as a possibility, and there is that energy buildup, that energy has to go somewhere. So it will create a parallel universe. Well, that reality will be manifested. So the truth is that there is actually no wrong answer or wrong choice, because you already experience all the different options available to you through different universes all the time. But this doesn't mean that your alternates in parallel universes have to take the choices that you don't take, because they, just as you do, have free will. Because you actually form a whole, a single entity. And so because they have free will, they will take the choices more appropriate to them at that point in time. And if, let's say, one of the options is still not being chosen, it will then create yet another parallel universe in which that option is still going to be manifested. Well, you might think, if this is true, then why am I not being aware of all these other parallel universes and alternate versions of myself? Well, you can understand that this creation process of parallel universes can go infinitely based on all the different choices and options that you have all the time. So you can imagine that it would be really exhausting for our human brains and our human minds to keep track of all these life experiences. Think how difficult life is only as being one person, you. Imagine how hard it would be if you have to keep worrying about all these alternate realities and the choices that your alters make. It is just about the experience. You might be probably still wondering, how can this happen? How is this possible? First of all, it doesn't happen because that implies that it has a beginning and it has an end. And the experience is not truly defined by such definitions. It simply exists and changes its form, but it never begins and it does never end. So I'm gonna be giving you a couple examples of this so you can better understand. And I have here some drawings. They're 4 circles and you can imagine them as being discs. Physical discs that you could actually rotate. So if, let's say, we have disc number 1 and the disc represents existence, the whole entire existence. And so if you were to draw a point on the infinity of existence, and if you were to rotate these discs in a single direction, because existence would happen, what then would experience is it would be constantly existing in a single direction. And this represents infinity. It doesn't have a beginning and it does not have an end. It simply exists. And on the disc number 2, if you were to draw, let's say, the representation of a human life as we understand it, you would have a starting point which would represent birth, and the disc would rotate and the experience would go on until it would reach death. So these 2 lines that are now connected represent birth and death. What we as humans would define the starting point and the end point of a life. And everything in between is your life experience. And you can see by comparison with the first disc that represents existence, the only difference to the second disc is the concept of birth and death, which are actually not starting point and end point, but they are just marking points that represent the transition from one form of existence into another form of existence. But then again, the human experience would still exist on that timeline for infinity. This represents infinity. So basically, the main reason that we have created such terms is because as human beings, we are very logical and understand based mainly on imagery, relating concepts that we already understand to more complicated terms so we can take a grasp of its meaning. And so this is what we've done with the meaning of the human existence. It does not exist because it does not have a starting point and an end point. These are just passing points. Okay, so now if we go to the third disc, if the way we imagine a life, it's by a single experience. So this would be what we have said that we understand our human life to be. But in fact, we have seen that it is not actually a single experience, but it's actually multiple tiny parallel realities that stack upon each other and create existence. So the same way, if you would imagine tiny little dots that create the big picture of a circle, but that circle is not actually a single line, but it creates the illusion of being a single piece because of the tiny little dots that create continuity. I don't know if this makes sense. I'm gonna get this closer so you can see what I mean. So in the first circle over here, we have infinite existence. It does not begin, it does never end, it simply exists. As the disk rotates in a singular direction, it creates just a continuous experience. Whilst in the second disk would be the representation of what we would understand human life to be. And you can see that the only difference between the two is that we have created the illusion of a starting and end point, which in fact do not exist. What we perceive as birth and as death to be is actually passing points, marking points that mark the shift of our consciousness into a different form. So now in the third disk, we see that human life that we perceive to be a continuous singular experience, it's actually not so, because a circle is actually created by a multitude of tiny little dots that represent multiple parallel universes that create an experience. Okay, and so how we can better understand in the fourth and last disk here, how we can understand the concept of past lifetimes and future lifetimes. So we have said that everything already exists within the infinity of existence. So all of our lifetimes, I'm gonna draw little, I hope you can see this. I'm gonna draw little circles that represent a lifetime and another lifetime and another one and so on. And there are many more, of course, but I can only fit so much in here. So the totality of our existences, of our lifetimes, already exist within infinity. They do all exist simultaneously in energy form. And the only reason, while we experience, let's say this outer layer here, the only reason while you experience this one to be your lifetime and you are not aware of the rest is not because they don't exist, but because your attention, your consciousness is observing this particular lifetime. And this is how you can also have a grasp of multiple lifetimes while being in human form. You just shift your awareness from one point in eternity to another point in eternity, and you would become aware of this life while still being incarnated right now. Another thing that I also want to mention is because we, while in human form, have the concept that time is linear. Therefore, we think that there's a past, a present, and a future that all go in a single direction, as we have said here. But we now know that these doesn't actually exist. Time does not exist in a linear form. Everything exists simultaneously. So if we apply this, we would normally think that if I had a past life, it must have been in the 1800s, let's say, for example. And now I'm living in 2020, and my future lifetime, for example, is gonna be in the year 3000, because it follows the same concept of past, present, and future. When in fact, because all of these lifetimes already exist, and we become aware of one particular lifetime because we place our attention, our consciousness manifests itself in a physical form through particles in that specific lifetime. But that doesn't mean that the way we incarnate is in a linear fashion. We incarnate based on the experiences that we want to have at this particular moment in time. If, let's say, I want to learn a certain lesson because that lesson is the most appropriate for me at this point in time, then the lifetime that I might experience is in the year, let's say, 4000, right? And that lifetime has passed, but it still exists within eternity. But when that starting and end point that represent the transformation of our consciousness from that lifetime, I can then go on into my next incarnation, which could be, let's say, 2000. So I'm just gonna show this to you one more time. This represents eternity, because as the circle moves in a single direction, what is then experienced is simply the experience. An infinite experience. It does not have a start, it does not have an end. Well, from our level of consciousness, we understand life to go in a linear direction, and it has a birth. We have a birth. Our life happens in between, and then we die. But these are actually just marking points. And this lifetime will always be and remain available to us in eternity. And we have said here, if we take a look at the third disc, human life is not actually one solid piece of experience, but it's actually created by multiple parallel universes, as if you would create a circle by drawing tiny little dots successively that create the circle. And these multiple parallel universes create the illusion of a single experience of a lifetime. And all of our lifetimes are available to us all the time. The only difference that makes which one we experience first is based solely on what experience is most appropriate for our growth at a certain point in time. So it does not have to be linear, it can go either way. It's just consciousness shifting its awareness. Alright, so I'm gonna stop here for now. I think it's just enough information for one video. So I'm gonna let you process all this. And part 2 of this video about parallel universes might come out soon as well. So if you have any questions that you want me to add to the video, you can leave it down in the comment section down below, and I will pick the most interesting questions to talk about. Until then, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, you can help me by hitting like and subscribe to my channel. See you on the next time. Light and love.